Hello, welcome back to Provoking Safety, the channel where we think, talk, and do safety with the intention of provoking safety at home and in the workplace. For those of you that are joining us for the first time, as I mentioned in the intro, we do safety here. That's our thing. And this video is about hazard recognition and control, specifically the field level hazard assessment. I've done other videos regarding the formal job hazard assessment. You can see part 1 up here if you click up here. And as I mentioned, it's a 2-part video. Part 2 is up here as well. Now, today I want to talk to you about, as I mentioned, the field level hazard assessment. Sometimes people refer to it as the site-specific hazard assessment or the worksite hazard assessment. It basically is used for things that are out of scope or out of routine that the job hazard assessment itself doesn't cover. Think of it this way: is the job hazard assessment covers a broad spectrum of the worker's tasks and duties, and the field level hazard assessment is very granular and specialized. I know it sounds a bit complicated, but you know what? Stick with me. I'll roll the introduction and we can get into it. So I'll see you in a second. Okay, as I mentioned before, it is virtually the same premise as the job hazard assessment, just a bit more granular, and it's meant to address things that are out of scope or out of routine. It's a formal assessment of the duties and tasks performed for a worker's job, very much the same for the job hazard assessment. However, it's for things that are out of scope. The idea is we look at the potential hazards and still implement controls to either eliminate or reduce the hazard significantly. The execution is very much the same. Methodology, whether we're writing it down on handwritten documents or using a tablet or a mobile device, process and methodology is very much the same. There is, however, some additional intricacies or additional things that we have to look at. So that's what this video is about, and we're going to delve into it a bit further.
I think you had better explain.
Now, I'm going to be reviewing some terms that are used, or I'm going to be using, some terms throughout this video. For those of you that haven't seen it before, and for a quick review, I'm just going to include them in the description section below. Rather than go and droll on and on about it, I've done a couple of other videos. The series on hazard recognition control is up here if you want to watch it all. If not, just have a look at the description below. The why we do things is essentially the same. And so once again, a lot of the whys I'll also include in the description below, emphasizing that this is for out of ordinary situations.
Extraordinary events call for extraordinary actions.
Yes, it's extraordinary, should we say. So we can look at some of these situations and why we would use a field level hazard assessment versus just relying on the job hazard assessment. And they are as follows. Now, number 1, of course, is going to be a new job site or a new work site. Think of it this way, is that we're getting to a new place that's not our normal. Now, sometimes you may have groups or folks that are going to be doing this on a constant basis. Think of landscapers, small paving and asphalting companies that are doing small parking lots or small driveways, and their job site's going to be changing lots. Their process that they're doing is always going to be very similar, but the job sites change. Another good example is construction sites, because construction sites, by their very nature, we're building up, they're going to change constantly. Another thing that's very similar but different is demolition. Whether imploding a building or taking a building apart bit by bit, or doing hazardous materials removal before we demolish a building. Either way, it's going to be an ever-changing environment. Another reason we're going to possibly be using field level hazard assessment is for tasks that are performed or duties that are performed in such an infrequent interval that the controls might have been forgotten, or the circumstances that we're doing them may have changed significantly within that time frame, such as you look at a piece of equipment that's being maintained only annually or only once every 2 years. Obviously, that's something that's going to require a different hazard assessment, especially if it's a bigger piece of equipment like a rooftop unit on a building you only go to once a year. Now, this list isn't exhaustive by any means. Okay, it just contains some examples. That's it. You're likely going to have other things that you may think about. And hey, if anybody comes up with another new significant reason, let me know below, please, by all means. Another reason we should be using a field level hazard assessment, or what it can also be used for, if you stick with me to the end of the video, I'm going to talk about it, okay? So, on to the next step. We've covered why. Let's talk about the how. The basic steps are the same. Okay, you're going to look at the duties and the tasks that are involved. You're going to break them down into small bite-sized chunks or a sequence of steps. You're going to identify the hazards with each, and then you're going to establish controls to reduce the hazard, or if at all possible, eliminate the hazard, therefore reducing risk and eliminating risk.
And we eliminate them.
However, there's some other additional considerations that we need to think about. Whether it's ever changing, whether it's wet conditions, dry conditions, cold conditions, too hot, weather always affects things. New equipment on the job site, new arrivals of new equipment, or significant projects, events with these pieces of equipment, such as think about a crane lift. If you've ever been around a construction site and there's going to be a major lift, that affects everything. And the planning is done sometimes weeks in advance for that lift that may not take a lot of time at all. Other additional considerations to think about: temporary safety requirements such as temporary railings, temporary guardrails, coverings over holes in walk surfaces or floors, toe boards, etc., scaffolding. People at the work site that are coming and going and changing, different trades, deliveries, etc. And then, of course, the chemicals and compounds. I know, wow, is that ever lots to think about? Guess what? I've got a way that you can remember it. It's a good acronym, or if you want to call it a mnemonic.
Have a mnemonic device for us, Kevin.
Okay, we can use it, and while you're going through and developing your checklists or however you're going to create your hazard assessment, this, I find, helps me when I'm doing both hazard assessments and inspections and investigations. So let's just move to it and we'll cover it. It's 4 basic letters, P-E-E-M. PEEM, or you can do MEEP, but I prefer this because I list them in the order of importance. Very first one is people. So we're going to talk about the workers, of course. Also, anybody else that's on the work site, contractors and inspectors and tradespeople that are coming and going, delivery folks, etc. You may need to have to consider people that you have to escort throughout the worksite, like architects or worksite inspectors or engineers that are going to come and commission something. They're not on the worksite often, so believe it or not, they become a hazard. Also, when you're thinking about people, think about the work that they're performing and the processes. The next letter is the first E, which stands for equipment and also machinery. Okay, equipment and machinery. What equipment is being used on the job site, how often, and are travel paths changing for this equipment? What about the vehicles where we park delivery stuff? What's the staging area like, etc.? These are all part of the hazard assessment. So think equipment and machinery when you're considering your hazard assessment. The next one, the next E, is environment. I know the very first thing in your mind is weather. But think about this, is weather can also affect things that you've got ready for your project. For instance, windy days tend to affect working at heights adversely. Or if you're putting up something, wind never works well with it. But also think about the work site itself. Is excessive rain going to make the ground and surfaces slippery? Is it going to affect how workers are doing their job? What about excessive cold, heat, etc.? But also think about the interaction in the environment. Is excessive dust going to have an effect on other workers, or what about sparks from grinding, etc.? So think about that when you're looking at the environment as well. Finally, the last letter, M, is materials. Building materials, materials that are also being used to wrap or cover the existing materials and equipment, also the chemicals and different compounds that are being used. Okay, list these and consider these as part of your hazard assessment. Now, next thing is who's involved. We've covered how, we've covered what, now we got to cover who.
Who's involved?
Yeah, who's involved. Very much the same as the job hazard assessment. Supervisors should be directly involved, either at least designating, if not directly and intimately involved with the process, and workers familiar with the work and familiar with the job site and its particular intricacies wherever possible. If you have the luxury and ability to include worker representatives, like worker safety representatives or health and safety committee representatives, even better, but you may not be afforded that luxury, but at least they have to be made aware that these field level hazard assessments are going on.
And this is how often?
Excellent question. How often? Not like the job hazard assessment where we can do it and put it on the shelf. Well, sort of. Actually, the job hazard assessment has things that prompt a revision of it too, very much like the field level hazard assessment. Let's look at them right now. So number one, of course, is if circumstances occur that will change and significantly affect the hazard or the controls. So things like changes in the weather, changes to the project in any way that either increases the hazards or reduces them. Also, things that may nullify the controls that we put in place and we have to establish new controls, such as it's rained more and we need to put up boardwalks. Just putting up with the mud is not enough anymore. Changes to the weather, arrival of new equipment, new people on the scene, other significant events. These things can all affect the hazard assessment and prompt a revision. Now, this is not, once again, this is not an exhaustive list, just to give you some examples and things to think about. Now, the next question you're going to have is, of course, does it need to be written down?
Do you have to write all this stuff down?
Guess what? The answer is yes. You have to record it somehow, some way. You have to record stuff for due diligence. In other words, to demonstrate that you did it and it was done. Also, too, is what do people have to reference? People have to be able to reference something, whether you have it as a handout or a posted notice or whatever the case may be. So let's look at what gives you due diligence. Number one, is it dependable? Does it address the people? Does it address the hazards? Does it address the controls? Does it address the place and the time? Format is immaterial. The last thing, of course, it has to be dated and it has to be signed. Okay? Now, I know that seems to be a lot, and I'll leave the list of mandatory elements below as well in the description so you can copy and paste it or do whatever you want with it. The format is immaterial. Whether you use an electronic system and send everybody an email and they just reply on their devices while they're present, whatever the case may be, lots of different methods for doing it. I'll leave that with you. You're going to have to figure out what works best for your organization. In summary, the field level hazard assessment or the site-specific hazard assessment, another type of hazard assessment. Once again, you cannot take another person's pair of boots, put them on, and go for a hike. Initially, they'll work, but after a while, you end up with a lot of pain. So you're going to need to consider what's going to work for your organization and consider the effectiveness. I've given you some things to think about, some materials below. If you like the video, please let me know that you liked it and hit the like button. For those of you that haven't done so already, do me a favor, click the subscribe button. Ring the bell and click all. That way you'll get notified of additional content when it appears in the channel. And hey, one more thing. I do have a little bit of a tip for you at the end here. Field level hazard assessments are also good for something else. They're good for the initial kickoff meeting that you're going to have at a job site. Good ingredient for it, and you can post them, hand them out to everybody, whatever the case may be. Plus, they're a good ingredient for your toolbox meetings that you should be having every morning while the worksite is occupied. They can be addressed, and even if anything, just quick little note on the revision, such as this hazard occurred, here's the control, that's what we're going to be looking at today. Or we're going to have the following delivery today, here's what we've done to control any hazards. Everything else is still the same. Your field level hazard assessments haven't changed. Highly unlikely that that's going to happen, that they haven't changed, but it's entirely possible. Anyway, that's all for now. Thank you for sticking with me to the end of the video. Until I see you next time, please remember, think safety, talk safety, do safety with the intention of provoking it at home and in the workplace. Bye for now.